I love this illustration by John Everett Millay of the moment in the parable when the servant who has been unmerciful has been brought back to the king by his fellow servants, and they're all standing around him, and he's going to have to give an account for his actions, why he did not forgive when he was forgiven so much. This is an amazing story, and as we think about it, it's worth just stating the obvious, that this is Jesus using fiction. He is not telling a story that actually happened. He is making up a story, and this piece of fiction here is designed to pose to us a problem, a kind of puzzle. That's what a parable is. A parable is a strange story that has elements in it that we need to reconcile or solve somehow. And this is a very strange story. In fact, I would call this a tall tale. This is kind of like Paul Bunyan. This has exaggerated things in it that are very hard to understand. And it comes right from the very beginning of the story. It's a story about power and helplessness. It's a king dealing with a slave. And this slave is in the king's power, and the king has really the power of life and death over this slave. And the slave is absolutely powerless to do anything about his situation. He is helpless. This is a story about mercy. Very great mercy. Inconceivable mercy. Kings don't act the way the king acts in this parable. In the days of ancient times, kings' power was kind of use it or lose it. They used their power over people, or they lost respect. They lost the fear that they were supposed to be held in. Kings did not often show mercy. They were not known for that. This king shows great mercy. And then it's contrasted with the pettiness of this slave who has another fellow slave in his power, and the way he uses his power against his helpless peer is quite petty. It's merciless, it's ruthless, and so you have this contrast between unbelievable, kind of unimaginable mercy from a king and unbelievable pettiness from somebody who has just been forgiven. It's also a story about debts, large ones and small ones. What really makes this story a tall tale is the size of the debt that this slave owes the king. How would this guy get himself into this much trouble? It's almost like he invested in cryptocurrency or something and ended up in all of this trouble. Jesus says he owed the king 10,000 talents. A talent is a sum of money worth about 20 years of day labor. So I ran this through the calculator. This guy owed the king the equivalent of about 200,000 years of labor. In other words, he is never going to pay this back. He owes like $10 billion. This is a tall tale. That large debt, that's a laugh line. In this story. His first listeners would have said, "Oh, you got to be kidding. This is crazy." He owes 10,000 talents, and he fell on his knees when he hears that he is to be sold to some other master, and the proceeds to pay off his debt, well, it's not even going to come close. You can sell his whole family. He's not worth $10 billion. You can sell everything he owns, and he's not worth that. So he says, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. That's another laugh line. No, you won't. You're not ever going to pay this back. This is too big for you. This is stupid big. How did you get yourself in this much trouble? And then there's a small debt. His fellow servant owes him 100 denarii. A denarius is worth 1 day's labor. So this is a substantial amount of money. I mean, the guy owes him the equivalent of something less than a third of a year's labor. So it's not nothing. This isn't like he owes him $5. He owes him real money. And there's a real cost to this. But look, the guy's just been forgiven $10 billion. How much more should he forgive the one who owes him 100 days' labor, or the equivalent of that, 100 denarii? So here's what he does. He seized this fellow servant. He began to choke him. He's just treating him violently, which is not how he was treated by the king to whom he owed $10 billion. So we can't believe this. Pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him. This is exactly parallel to what the first servant did. Pleaded with him, have patience with me, and I will pay you. Well, that's actually a fairly reasonable plea, because you could, with patience, pay back something like 5 figures, or whatever this works out to be in modern money. So it's a reasonable plea, but when he finishes with him, he refuses to forgive him and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. So, you know how this story ends. The fellow servants watch this go down, and they go back to the king, and they say, you got to know what this guy just did. And so they haul him back before the master, and the master says this, you wicked servant. Why is he wicked? Is he wicked because he got into $10 billion worth of debt? That's not the wickedness in the parable. Is he wicked because he's trying to be a wheeler-dealer with his fellow slaves and he gets them in debt to him? That's not why he's wicked in the context of this parable. The master says, you wicked servant, because I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. You got down on your hands and knees and you pleaded for the freedom of yourself and your family, your wife and children. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And so he delivers him to the jailers. The original here is really torturers until he should pay all of his debt, which is to say, never. He's never going to pay this back. You're done. Why? Because you're wicked. And why are you wicked? Because you wouldn't forgive. So we need to think about this story. Last year at this holiday, I preached a sermon called How to Start a New Season, because we were starting a new season as a church. And the point of that sermon, which was too long, I hope you'll forgive me, but the point of it was, I can summarize it quickly, all of our difficulties and challenges are the things that God uses to propel us into a new season. That's a hard truth. That's been a hard truth for us to learn our whole lives, and it's been a hard truth for us to face this year. But it is true, and one of the points that I made in the context of that sermon was, to start a new season, you need to forgive. And several conversations came out of that sermon. So I thought I would come back to this point about forgiveness, because there is nothing that comes up again and again in the Christian life, over and over, even daily, sometimes hourly. There's nothing that comes up so much as forgiveness. There's nothing so central to who we are as the people of Jesus Christ as forgiveness. And there is nothing that is more lacking today, it seems, in churches than forgiveness. I've been reflecting on this looking back over the last 5 to 10 years, stretching back to the time that I was a pastor in California, and just thinking about the year that I turned the church over to my associate pastor in Chico. In that year, I forget how many church splits there were, but there were churches splitting all over Northern California, and multiple churches in Chico itself, the town that I was in. And I was in this bizarre position of knowing people in all of these different situations and hearing the same story pan out over and over and over again. Basically a story of unforgiveness. And so, how many Christians are there in Northern California? There aren't that many. I mean, it's not like it's not like a Bible Belt up there. So basically, if you take a town like Chico, it's all the same people shifting from place to place in unforgiveness. And so there's little wonder that the unforgiveness just travels from church to church, because it's all the same people. And the people they were mad at in one church, they encounter 20 years later in another church. Ithaca has a pretty good dose of this. Every town in America does. There's nothing so appalling about the experience of church life in America, especially during COVID, post-COVID, as the bitterness of church experience. And I think if you start peeling back the layers of this, you start to see all of the people who are missing from church, who are saying, I will never go back. And it's not like they made a big ruckus going out the door. They didn't. They left quietly, and they left in deep offense at the bitterness and anger of church experience. And indeed, churches are declining in the United States. Everybody wonders why. How did we lose the culture? Forget about gaining the culture. You couldn't even keep the church. It's ridiculous what we're doing with our fantasies about church life and what church ought to be. And at the center of it is the issue of forgiveness and bitterness. And so I thought I would come back to this issue as we face a new year and just say there's hope for each one of us this morning. We do not have to take old grievances into the new year. Your life can change this morning. with forgiveness. So let's think about the action of forgiveness. Our society has a view of forgiveness that's basically just generalized. Just move on. Bad thing happened. It was terrible. It did harm to you. So what you need to do in order not to be bound up in that harm is just move on. It's like a backpack that's you're carrying around. Just take the backpack off, leave it by the side of the road, and walk away. Can you really do that with pain? Can you do that with harm that's been done to you? When a wrong has been done to you, can you actually just leave it by the side of the road? The answer is no. And that's why we discover walking down the road that backpack is still tied to us. There's sometimes a short rope and sometimes a very long one. And we realize after a while we're still pulling that backpack. It's just way back there on the road. It's just tied to our ankle is all. Our society is not capable of forgiving because it does not have Jesus. I'll make this a little bit more frightening. Christians are not capable of forgiving because they do not have Jesus. I'll show you why I say all of this. I want to get a lot more specific with you about what this action of forgiveness is. The definition of forgiveness in the term, one of the terms that the king uses here, he says, Jesus says, out of pity, verse 27, the master of the servant released him and forgave him the debt. The word forgive here is aphiemi. It means release. And it's actually a word that in other contexts is used with the same meaning for divorce. You know what happens when you get married. And so 32 years ago, Bridget and I got married. Our identities changed. We were no longer two single people. We were now husband and wife once we took those vows. And our identities have stayed that way ever since. So we got married. We've stuck it out. We haven't got divorced. So our identities hold. But if, for some reason, we were to get divorced, what would happen? If we were to get divorced, we would be released from those identities and from the bond that holds us together. And that release would change our identities again. We would go back to being single people, or maybe our identities would become exes, ex-wife, ex-husband. So our identities would be released from each other, and that bond would no longer stick. That's the concept of forgiveness. When Jesus uses the term forgiveness, he's saying you need to release, divorce the people in your life from their identities. So this servant here, the servant who owes $10 billion, that servant has an identity. He is a debtor and a bankrupt debtor because he can't pay it back. So let's suppose the master releases him from that debt. Now his identity no longer sticks to him. The identity of debtor, no longer adheres to that servant. He is now a free man. That's quite a powerful thing. If you've stolen something, you have a new identity. You're a thief. If you're forgiven, you are divorced from that identity and you are no longer a thief. It doesn't stick to you, that label, anymore. if you are an adulterer, if you've committed adultery against your spouse, your identity is an adulterer. If you are forgiven of that sin, then that identity no longer sticks to you. It's like the Post-it note that you put on the dashboard, the sticky comes off of it and it falls on the floor. It doesn't adhere to you anymore. You are divorced from your sins. That's the concept that is being used here. That's the definition of this term. To forgive is to release. So, let's suppose someone has wronged you, and you've got a name that you now call that person. You are a liar. You are a betrayer. You are a slanderer. And let's just assume for the moment that we're absolutely clinically correct in saying those things. Let's just assume that for the sake of argument. I realize that's assuming quite a lot, and that should give us some pause before we throw these words around and accuse people of things. We really do need to understand whether they are actually guilty of the things we accuse them of. Because sometimes we have a little inflation of the accusation to tell people how badly hurt we feel. And that's not just either. So let's assume that's not happening. Let's just assume that clinically, forensically, we are absolutely accurate in saying you're a liar. What are you going to do about that? Well, if you're going to manage that pain somehow, then you've got to have a little prison cell in your heart. And that person somehow has to be in that cell. And you are the jailer of that prison cell, and you're keeping that person there. You're holding that person in that cell, and on the side of that cell is the name that that person has acquired, liar. Now, you've got to punish that person. That's a lot of work, actually. Punishing people takes effort, especially when they're not around. So if I'm going to punish somebody, that means that I've got to go down into my heart to that jail cell, and I've got to repeat those accusations as often as it takes for me to be satisfied. Okay, I've punished you enough for being a liar, and now I can let you out. And you kind of decide, how long is that? Maybe it's a week. I'm going to punish you in my heart in that jail cell for a week and give you the silent treatment or whatever, or call you nasty names. And then when you're punished enough, I can let you out of the cell. But there's a funny thing that happens. Once you're punished enough, have you ever really lost that title, that accusation? No, you haven't. It still sticks to you. You're that liar from way back. And so if you ever do it again, then I can put you back in the cell and punish you again, because I only let you out on parole, it turns out. So that's kind of how this works. It's labor-intensive. It involves the expenditure of immense reserves of emotional energy to punish the people in your life. So, forgiveness is saying, I'm going to open the jail door, I'm going to throw away the key, I'm going to leave it open, and I'm going to reach up and I'm going to take that name, that accusation, off the side of the jail. You're not a liar anymore. That's not who you are. I'm not going to treat you as a liar. I'm not going to incarcerate you here, and I'm not going to spend the energy to punish you. And you say, okay, I get all of that. But what then happens to the wrong that was done? Because we stipulated here, it is actually true. The person actually did lie to you. So when you put them in jail, your action was just. It was correct. And the fact that you release them from jail and say, oh, I'm not going to punish you anymore, and I'm going to take the label off, I'm going to divorce you from that identity now, none of that changes the fact that you were lied to. So what do you do about that? Where does that claim go? What happens to it? Well, in the world's terminology, nothing happens to it. It just kind of falls down by the side of the road, and we pretend it's not there. We just move on. But in Christianity, in what Christ has done for us, something does happen to that claim. There's a change of custody. So sometimes a prisoner is released from one jail and remanded to the custody of another jurisdiction. What happens there? One jurisdiction is saying, this isn't our prisoner anymore. So we've got judges here, we've got police, and we've got jails, but we don't have a judge over this person, over this case anymore. This decision is going to be made somewhere else. And so the change of custody is that claim goes to another court. It does not disappear. It just changes venue. So when we talk about forgiveness, we're talking not so much about saying something that's not true. We're not saying, well, we're just going to pretend that it didn't happen, because it did happen. We're not going to pretend that it doesn't hurt anymore, because it does hurt. We're not going to pretend that there was no harm, because there was harm. We're not going to pretend any of that. We're just saying that in my relationship with you, you are no longer in my custody. So whose custody is the person in when you forgive them? When you say, I'm not going to treat you any longer as a liar. There's a change of custody to the custody of Christ. And here we're moving outside a little bit the domain of this parable, but not all that far. Because Matthew 18 is all about the relationship between the church and sinners, and in particular, the relationship between the apostles and sinners. And Jesus is saying to them, you must forgive them. And you forgive them because you're handing them over to me. Now, you say, well, what difference does that make when I forgive someone? I have found that it makes all the difference in the world. One, it does not require me to tell untruths about what happened to me. It does not require me to say, oh, well, let's just forget it. Let's just pretend that nothing wrong happened here, that there was no harm here. Because I can't do that, and I don't think that you can do that either. And I think it's very important that you understand that Jesus is not calling you to pretend. Because if he is, then there really is no forgiveness. It's just an arbitrary state of mind that you're in at any given moment toward another person, and that state of mind can change. No, Jesus is saying, hand them over. That claim of wrong against that other person lied to you, that did real harm, that claim, give it to me. Hand it over. I'll take it. Now, why would he take it? There's very good reason. Jesus purchased the right to judge all sin. He purchased that right. With what currency? He purchased it with his life on the cross. And how do we know that he gained that right? Jesus told us in John chapter 5, the Father raises me to life and gives me life in myself so that I am the judge at the last day. That's how we know. The resurrection of Jesus. And when we are raised from the dead, we will stand before him. We will not stand before each other. There's been an ultimate change of custody. So in forgiveness, what we're saying is something like this. I have let this person out of jail in my heart. I am not going to punish this person any longer. I am divorcing this person in my relationship from their identity as liar, betrayer, whatever it is. I have done all of that. And now I take the claim of the wrong and the harm and I hand it to my Savior. Why would I do that? Because he has forgiven me. He went to that cross for me. And I know what I owe. So I'm not going to take this claim and hold it against my fellow slave. I'm going to release that person and I'm going to hand them over to the custody of the judge. Now, something inside each one of us is rebelling against this whole action. If I do that, then I lose my power over that person. I can't guilt them anymore. I can't blackmail them anymore. I can't hold this over their head to make them change. No, you can't. How was that working for you before you forgave them? Were they changing? Was anything changing? Or were you just getting more miserable and shriveled because of the immense energy you were putting into punishing that person? Now, this change of custody means that I have said something very clear, and I've marked it in my experience, that I have no jurisdiction over this decision. I do not have this claim any longer. I have given the claim over to the judge. The judge will decide. So what I'm saying when I forgive someone is, you are Jesus' problem, not mine. And I'm going to continue to treat you as if you are free from this debt. Jesus holds my claim. He holds all the claims. He holds all the claims against me. And he has the right to say one of two things. He can either say, I forgive you too on the last day because I purchased the right to do that. I paid your debt. He can say that. Now, think what that means. That means that the person who is the liar and who wronged you, that means when you forgive them, you're saying you're okay with Jesus forgiving them. You're saying, Jesus, if you do that, I trust you. If you forgive them on the last day and my claim disappears because your blood paid for it, I am good with that. Jesus may also say, for whatever reason, I am not forgiving this. And we know there's only one reason why Jesus would not forgive. And that is because a person does not have faith in him and has not given their life over to him, they're not Jesus' redeemed slave with their debts paid. That's why. So we're saying, Jesus, you have the wisdom to make that decision. I do not. The claim does not belong to me anymore. It belongs to you. Here's the difference that this makes. I don't have to say, well, it wasn't that bad, the lie. It wasn't that bad. The harm wasn't that bad. I got over it. I don't have to say anything like that. I don't have to minimize. I don't have to pretend. Because I actually can't do that. I don't like being a pretender, especially in issues like this. What Jesus allows me to do is he allows me to say, that harm was real. The wrong was real. It actually happened, but I'm not going to hold the claim anymore. I'm going to give the claim over to Jesus. And once I do that, there's nobody in my jail cell in my heart. I don't have to punish them. My energy can go somewhere else. I don't have to think like the blackmailer who is trying to guilt someone into changing. I don't have to think that way anymore. I'm free from all of that responsibility to get a chokehold on the person who wronged me. I can just let them go. And my letting go is a real letting go because of the cross. It's not an exercise in self-deception. So, what are we saying? Forgiveness is a very specific thing. It is you saying, I am going to release you from the accusation that stands against you. I'm going to hand that accusation over to Jesus. Whatever he does, I know will be right because he is good and he has the right to make this decision. I do not have that right. I don't have the right because I'm a debtor too. And my debts are paid, and it is wrong, it is wicked for me to receive forgiveness and not give it. But the other reason I don't have the right to do this is I'm actually not competent to punish people. When they're not around and I can't call them names, what am I really going to do? I'm just going to do a lot of stuff inside my own soul. What I do to punish people is pretty pathetic. So, that's what forgiveness is biblically in terms of where Jesus is coming from and what he is asking us to do. You don't have to take old grievances into the new year. You can start something completely different in your life. It can be different in a couple of ways. First, emotionally. This kind of forgiveness enables you to be renewed from the harm that has been done to you. You can be renewed because you don't have to pretend that the harm didn't happen. You can be truthful about the harm. And that's really the first step in healing from anything, is realizing, yes, I have this problem. This actually does hurt. It really is wrong. And so I really do need to heal. You can take that step. But the thing that really enables you to be restored emotionally is the fact that you're free. You don't have to punish the person anymore. So your emotional energy is not bound up in making your accusations stick. You're free. Your energy can go to other places. Let me tell you why I'm actually preaching this sermon. The funny thing, when you wind up in very challenging times, as my family has been in. All sorts of old stuff comes back. I've been actually really shocked at the things that have come back into my mind over the past several weeks and have really affected me. And there are a lot of them because, as I said, I'm getting old. And so it's compiling. And so one of those things is the results of church bitterness in Chico. It affected me in many different ways. I was betrayed by close leaders in a church context. I was lied about. I was excluded by people I had no quarrel with because they believed lies that were told about me. All of these kinds of things happened, and that lives on. And so when you come under duress, when you're challenged in other ways, in new circumstances, all this old stuff can come back. I am very thankful and grateful to God that when all of that stuff happened, He led me through a process of forgiveness with one man in particular, where I never had a conversation with him, but I had a conversation with Jesus about him. And I never had a conversation with him because I couldn't. It was not that kind of relationship. And we'll talk about this more in a moment. But what I ended up saying repeatedly in that period of months, in the aftermath of this, where Bridget and I had lost almost all of our friends, some of them lifelong, because of the actions of this man. I just said, I release him. I don't know why he did it. I still don't know why. I've got people asking me why, as if I knew, and I don't. And so I don't know why he did it. I don't know any of the things that led up to this. I just know that he did it, so I'm going to release him. I'm not going to punish him in my heart or in any other way. I am not going to pursue him. I'm not going to try to expose him, all of which I wanted to do because this really hurt. But I released him, and gradually, over the course of months and years, my prayers started to change for him. I started to realize that there was a lot at stake in Jesus forgiving him what he had done. A lot. There was a lot at stake for his family that I hadn't really thought of when I was out to pursue him and expose him and get all of this righteous vengeance. There's a lot at stake for his family. There's a lot at stake for the community of believers in that town. There's a lot at stake for him. And my prayers began to change genuinely. Jesus, please release him. Change him. Work in his family, work in his life, work in his heart. That's the only way these harms are going to stop, is if you do these things with him that I cannot do. I can't make him do it. I can't guilt him into do it. I can't do any of that, but you can do these things. So now, coming up on 10 years later, when I'm worn down and all of the old stuff comes back again, I have markers in my soul. There's an empty jail cell down in my soul, and the door swinging on its hinges. There's nobody in there. And I can go back down there, and I can look at it, But that empty jail cell down there in my soul and in my memory tells me he's remanded to different custody now. You don't have the right to make any decisions about him. Don't renew these accusations. Don't try to get the claim back. Let him go. He's in good hands, as is everyone in the community around him. They're all in good hands if you just leave it there. So that when I'm down, discouraged, weak, resentful, I have a strength to not pick this back up again. And it's a powerful thing, these markers. It's especially powerful when it's grounded in truth, not self-deception. So there is emotional healing that comes through all of this. There is also relational healing. The way is open to reconciliation if you forgive. If you don't forgive, there is no way open. There's just the jail cell. That's it. And as long as that way toward reconciliation is open, and as long as the person leading that reconciliation is Christ, then something can happen. But you do know, don't you, this is a two-way street. Sometimes we're called to forgive people who are dead, and there will be no reconciliation with them. I've seen this in my family. Sometimes we are called to forgive people who are absolutely untrustworthy. And here's a very important distinction that I want you all to understand. That mercy is free. Praise God. Trust is earned. Do not give trust for free. And it's entirely possible that you're confused about this issue because let's take people who play on these kinds of issues, abusers, physical and emotional abusers, always want you to put an equal sign between forgiveness and trust. No, forgiveness is you taking the claim that is in your heart and giving it to Jesus. You're trusting him because he's good for it. And you're saying, this is all going to work out well and good because Jesus is who he is. That's one action. But then there's the action of, should I have more interactions with you? Should I have... should I rebuild the relationship that I thought I had with you? Well, maybe you should. I would say most of the time, we absolutely should. 99% of the time, we should rebuild trust after wrong has happened. But you do need to understand that trust is a two-way street, and sometimes traffic isn't coming the other way. That doesn't mean you have the right then to abuse the person and punish them and try to put them back in the jail cell. No, you've dealt with that. And this was the situation I was in, where I had trusted implicitly this man, and there was absolutely no way that it would be wise for me to put that trust back for free. Couldn't do it. You do know that we have the entire book of Proverbs as a gift to us from God, telling us, don't give your trust away. Do good, extend mercy, be gracious as God is. But this is a dangerous world, and you are not required to expose yourself again and again to dangers that you know are there. What you are required to do is to say to that person, and perhaps to that person who has wronged you, I release you. I forgive you. We are at peace. I will do no wrong to you. We are required to do that. That's hard enough. It's very difficult to do. So there are some distinctions here that we need to observe, but I just want to end on this note. Verse 35 of Matthew 18. This is Jesus drawing the point of the parable. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you. He's talking to the apostles here. If you do not release your brother from your heart. Beloved, the sad state of Christianity in America, it is entirely possible that it is the judgment of God on an unforgiving people of God. And there's only one way to turn that around. But the good news is we can turn it around. We can give forgiveness. We've got the best reason for all eternity, the cross of Jesus Christ.